Hello and welcome to this edition of ISB&M Kolkata organized webinar series on the theme of Adapt, Evolve and Succeed. Today we will talk about what's new in the new normal. We will look at the codes of the new normal. We have with us a very interesting panel today. As we know, our institution, ISB&M, that is International School of Business and Media. Keeping this two in mind, we have in our panel practitioners both from the field of corporate business as well as media. We have with us Mr. Nilanjan De, who has worked extensively in the fields of media and finance with specialization in stockbroking. He is also a popular columnist with the English daily The Telegraph. We also have with us Dev Komal Ganguly. Mr. Ganguly is an alumnus of SRFTI Kolkata. He's an independent filmmaker, video artist, media practitioner and researcher. He's currently working in the film editing department of FTII Pune. We have in our panel Professor Mohua Moitra, former news person, media consultant, and a faculty at ISB&M. And sharing the stage, rather the platform with me, is Professor Brita Singh, a communication trainer and a faculty at ISB&M. Welcome all the panelists. Thank you very much to be here. Today is a special day. It's World Environment Day. And we are looking at a new world which heralds maybe new prospects and new codes. My first question to be asked is for Mr. De. Mr. De, since you have an expertise in stockbroking, my first inquiry would be, what do you think, what according to you, is the future of the equity and bond market?
Right. Thank you very much for asking. You know, the markets are a function of two very important elements, risk and return. Now, equity and bonds, the two principal asset classes, have both undergone a bit of a crisis insofar as these two important elements, that is returns and risk, are concerned. Equity, as you know, has been quite volatile for a very long time, especially after the crisis, and valuations have fallen, profitability have been impacted, companies are not making the kind of money they thought they would make. In short, the quarters that would be ensuing would be a challenge for the corporate sector as a whole. Now, having said that, we also need to know what the real challenges are in terms of one, supply side constraints, demand not getting created enough, labor issues and the like. But the long and short of it is that profit visibility would be lower. Now, equity valuations, as you know, are a function of profit visibility. If the market senses that profits are here, profits are visible, the stock prices tend to rise. And that's a very simplistic way of putting it. Now, since visibility is lower, valuations will not go up. The future immediate, therefore, is a bit challenging. Now, on the debt side, things aren't too looking up either. Debt, as you know, are a function of credit risk and interest rate risk, and both have gone through certain crises of their own. Credit risk has happened. A lot of companies in the recent past have not been able to pay their debtors, and that has led to credit ratings going down the hill. Insofar as interest rate risk is concerned, as you know, the Reserve Bank of India have been reducing interest rate for a very long time now. That's about 10 straight quarters. And, rates aren't the kind of rates you used to see earlier. Now, having said that, both credit and interest rate risk being, acting up, debt valuations are also under pressure. So equity side and debt side have a bit of a problem. So if you are expecting a recovery henceforth, I would believe equity would be going up first if the recovery is strong enough. That always happens. Debt would take a bit of a time. we would have interest rate challenges, we would have credit risk challenges, but equity would be, especially on the smaller and the mid cap side, would have larger room to play. The large caps, the most the interesting parts of the market would be large caps. They might take a bit longer to act up because they have fallen considerably, and the indices, equity indices, would be telling you a very different sort of story, but that only would happen in the next 3 or 4 quarters, not immediately. Thank you, Amrita.
So as we understand that, yes, we acknowledge that there's an immediate crisis, but of course, if you look at future, there's always a light at the end of the tunnel, if I have
That is
understood
right,
correctly.
yes.
Which makes me talk about the other light at the end of the tunnel, which is the startups or innovations. That seems to be the way forward. And there's a lot of interest generated around these, and a lot of creativity, as well as there's a lot of enthusiasm around startups and innovation. What do you think would be the codes or the ideas or methods of financing these efforts or these startups and innovations?
Right. No, one would not expect the institutional bankers to be very friendly towards startups for the time being. But be that as it may, I expect a lot of activity in the startup funding pace where smaller players are concerned. And I include the entire gamut of VCs and incubators that you see. And the future is very bright for that sort of investment in for young smart startups and companies that have been formed by young entrepreneurs that we see in the, especially in the IT services and the telecom and those spaces. There would be considerable interest taken by high net worth individuals, and endowments typically often root their interest in that market through dedicated venture funds. And the future there is quite bright, I would say. I can't really bandy out figures at the moment, but it would happen. It would happen. It's been already happening, and this particular crisis is possibly a blip in the curve, but it's going to happen.
Thanks for the optimistic outlook. I suppose, Brita, would you have a question for him?
Yes, I have a particular question for you,
Yes,
Nilanjan.
Professor.
Everybody is looking for investment avenues, but everybody is divided into groups. You have the young people who've just begun on a career. You have people in their mid-career span of time, and then you have the old and decrepit like me. And we're all looking for a safe place to invest. Now, what would be the best avenues available to us?
Right.
Keeping in mind optimization of returns, the risk factor, and most importantly, liquidity. Because, if you're in a jam, you want to be able to get your money out and not be told that, sorry, it's locked up for 3 years or 5 years.
Right. Very interesting question, Professor. Our returns would be a function of the kind of asset allocation that we do. And we are all unique individuals. And the asset allocation that you would have is not the asset allocation a younger person or an sufficiently older person would have. In other words, you are an unique individual with unique needs, with unique risk return perspective. Now, having said that, a senior person would automatically, I would expect that person to be more interested in debt. And the reason is very clear. Debt is stable, debt is safer, and debt gives you current income. As opposed to equity, which is a far more challenging asset class, which is marked by volatility and instability and uncertainty and the whole works. Now it has to be a very good mix between equity and debt. And here deliberately I'm keeping the other asset classes out. In other words, I'm keeping commodities and real estate and alternative investments, etc., and exotic investments deliberately out of the equation. We are talking about the two primary classes of assets here. Now, the rule of thumb is very simple. A younger person who has many more risk-taking years ahead of him would have a longer time horizon to play with, that person I would expect to be far more interested in equity than in the other class, that is debt. And a sufficiently senior person who's had his or her years earlier and seen the best of times and gone through several market cycles would be a lot more interested in debt. Both have reasons of their own. Both reasons are very special. Both reasons are infallible.
Okay,
I don't know whether
see.
that sort of
That
answers
is
your question.
brilliant.
But,
It tells me exactly what I should do and will also help our younger people to decide where they should park their money. Now, I have a slew of questions on Facebook for you.
right.
Avirupa, could I take them, please?
Yes, or before that, Professor Moitra, would you like to ask a question to Mr.
I think, let's take those questions first. Avirupa, am I audible?
Sure, absolutely.
Okay, fine. Let's take those questions.
Are you telling me to
Over to
go
you,
ahead?
Rita. Over to you, Rita.
Okay. There is Nirmal Samsukha, our alumni, who has asked a question. He says it's a simple query. While our fourth quarter GDP is down, our financial system is shaken, then how come our share market is closing in green?
For Dimple, I have a very simple explanation. The market has closed in green for a day or two, but if you've seen very recent trends, the markets have been a function of the growth displayed by the GDP. Now, GDP, as you know, is under a lot of pressure. All economic indicators that stem from GDP are also under serious strain. Now, having said that, we don't really expect the market to really run ahead of its time and beat longer term GDP growth trends. That indeed has happened in stretches in the recent past, and therefore your question is very well expressed and and very well pointed out. But it cannot go on for a very long time. It cannot go in for multiple market cycles. Mind you, Moody's has very recently cut India's investment grade rating. We don't really expect a lot of foreign institutions, the money bags, to come in with hordes and sweep our markets with dollars. And because that is a fairly unlikely situation, the green that you're referring to is possibly a one-trick pony, and it won't be repeated in a hurry for a very long time.
I have just another question.
Yes.
This is from Professor Ashish Mitro from ISBM Kolkata.
Right. Hello.
Now he asks a question which I think will throw us all into disarray. He wants to know, do you think the trade war between USA and China will affect the Indian stock market in a big way?
It does throw me into disarray, but a trade war as a political tool, trade war being weaponized, I am not too concerned about that, because those things have happened in the past, and the market, whether we like it or not, have factored it in to an extent. Temporarily with the news headlines, the scary headlines, the market does react, but on a longer term thing, and if you stretch the horizon, that really won't affect the market the way the scaremongers among us would like to think. Now, I know that's a very general sort of answer, but I think it's you understand what I sort of wish to explain.
Okay, one last question.
Yes.
Question.
Yes.
This is about the Midas touch and gold. The question is from JP Rott. So this is obviously he's referring to your earlier answer where you advise people about where they should invest depending on their age groups. Do you advise investors to put some money in gold, EFTs? Gold is forecast to rise to about 55,000 per tola.
Right. One small disclaimer there. Age is just one of the factors that should lead to an ideal investment mix. There there are many other factors that we really possibly won't have time for that, maybe in another session. But age is just one of the several important, nonetheless, it's very important, issues that we should be concerned about.
No, his
Gold
question
has
is
already-
more
yeah.
about investing in gold.
And fixed deposits, FDs, he said. I'll break that, into two parts. Gold has already seen a bit of a run, and the 55,000 quotation that you've quoted, I'm not disputing that. And the investors in gold, if they're lucky enough, would possibly see that mark getting breached and getting more in terms of their gold valuation. But any investment in gold would now have to be very graded, very calibrated. You buy in dips. When the market dips, the gold market dips, you buy. And if you are not brave enough to do it yourself, go through a gold fund. When I talk about gold fund, I actually mean either a gold fund, that is a mutual fund that invests in the gold market through the index routes. And I'm actually not referring to buying physical gold at all. The other thing is that if you are, smart enough, brave enough, and more importantly, have time for that market, you go through the commodity exchanges and buy gold straight away and, trade in gold. But that's chiefly for traders and not acquirers. Is this okay? Hello, am I audible?
Yes, you
Yes,
are.
Am I
you are
audible?
audible.
Gold, I understand, is a very, very, serious sort of asset class, and, it elicits a lot of active response.
He's
But
used
that's
the
the way
term.
you should do it.
He's used the term EFT.
Hello?
Money in gold, EFT.
Okay.
That is the term that he's used.
Okay. His other question was on fixed deposits, right?
No.
Okay.
It was since gold is forecast to rise, is it a good idea to put money into gold?
Yes, in a
EFTs?
very graded and in a very calibrated way. Buy when the market falls, and that's your opportunity, and wait for a fresh rise.
I think that answers the for Mr. Dey. Professor Moitro, would you like to ask or add on to the question, please?
Hello. Virupa, you asking me?
Yes, yes. Would you like to ask a question to
Yeah, no.
I think we have just
I
lost
think we've lost contact with Mo.
with Professor Moitra. However, we'll carry on with our discussion. It's a very interesting point that this discussion has led to. You're talking about buying gold, where if I
Not
understand,
buying gold ETFs.
I see.
ETFs, yes.
Right.
Exchange
So
traded
you see,
funds. Yeah.
the gold and the equity market perhaps balance each other. I don't know. Yeah.
Oh,
would that
and
be
gold
it?
is a very important hedge against inflation. And when
Yes.
other markets are failing, you have gold. And buying gold ETFs is a very good idea. But as you know, ETF is traded like a stock on a stock exchange. So you have to be always on your toes. And you need to buy and sell at every opportunities. ETF is principally for traders. Certainly you can buy and stay invested for a longer time than mere months or mere weeks, but it is principally for traders. And if you're looking at acquisition, ETF is a very cheap way of doing it. But if you're looking for a more serious kind of allocation in gold, go through gold exchanges, commodity exchanges, and buy gold there.
Right.
Another question. Could I take it?
Yes, ma'am.
The other question is that do you think that the Chinese market is providing provocation to the Indian market? And is it necessary or would it help if there was a boycott of the Chinese market?
Boycott of the Chinese market.
A boycott of the Chinese products. Would that help the Indian market?
No, that really wouldn't help the Indian market straight away. On the contrary, On the contrary, and please mark my words, I'm being very serious here. On the contrary, it would really be a spoiler. Imagine a market in India, a domestic market with no access to electronic goods. Imagine a market in India with no access to branded goods of all sorts that China produces, and the landed cost of which is a fraction of what Indian producers produce in India. And if you do it overnight, trade war or not, that would create ripples of an enormous scale. And that would hurt the Indian consumer's interest. So my answer is no. If the Chinese market is suddenly boycotted, or we put enormous tariffs on the path of Chinese imports, we will create problems for us. That won't help us.
I saw a program today where they were talking about the Chinese market.
Yes.
And the gentleman mentions that if we were to ban products made in China,
Right.
none of us in India would be able to buy a smartphone.
Right.
Because every smartphone has at least a number of components
Right.
which are made in China.
Right. True.
So,
Right. So it's not feasible.
thank you
really.
for your answer.
Right. Right. Absolutely.
So it's not a feasible solution to boycott at the moment. We need to look at an integrated developmental attitude, which brings me to something that you said while answering about the innovation and startup. You said the angel investors. We talked about the high net worth individuals who could be probable angel investors.
Right.
So keeping that in mind, we have people in India right now who are high net worth individuals, and it's on the rise.
Right.
Contrary to popular belief that India is a poor country, we also have a concentration of very rich individuals who have a lot of disposable income, who are basically looking at ways to invest.
Right.
Having that in mind, where do you think is the scope for a wealth manager?
Okay.
For new entrants in this industry who aspire to be wealth manager, where are their scopes and possibilities and opportunities, if I may say that?
Right. Right. You are absolutely right, Avirupa. Considerable individual wealth is waiting in the wings, for entry to the VC space, etc. And this creates enormous opportunities for wealth managers who would be looking at offering value-added products to such individuals. Whether it is in the VC space or whether it is in the established markets, equity, debt, commodities, etc., I would think that considerable attention would now be automatically given to things like index products, alternative investment funds, to portfolio management schemes. Now, these are not new. These have been there in the market already, with or without the present crisis. But it stands to reason to only assume that these products would become more efficient, more cost effective, and indeed more acceptable to people. So the wealth manager of the future has his or her role cut out, absolutely cut out. And there would be a series of new generation products to offer. Because remember,
Nilanjan,
yeah, excuse me.
I think that you have actually, in fact, answered the question put to us by Professor Arunima Das, who asked, what are the other options that you would recommend? And that is exactly what you have addressed in your answer.
Right.
Talking about opportunities and possibilities, I would like to now move on to Mr. Dev Kamal Ganguly. Talking about opportunities and possibilities, although we talk about film and media industry, right now, as we speak, we mourn the demise of Bashu Chatterjee, who has been a pioneer of the new middle ground cinema, if I may call it, middle ground between art and commercial, where the aspirations of the middle class were celebrated.
Right.
And with his demise, an era has passed, so to say. And right now, as we speak, it's a very interesting time for film and media professionals or people who aspire to be in this field this crisis can be seen in terms of opportunities and possibilities as well. Since you have a wide range of experience, both as a professional and a practitioner, and also as a mentor and professor in this field, giving the hands-on training to the new professionals who are going to enter. With your varied experience, if you could just highlight the opportunities and possibilities that are there or that awaits us in the new normal.
Right. Thank you, Virupa, for your question. The point is, obviously, we are opening up gradually. New codes are being laid out for industry to open up, to function. Even the worry to whether enough people will be there at cinema halls and multiplexes, some thoughts are being going on there as well. But if we consider this pandemic, global pandemic, as a significant experience in our lifespan, not just a kind of passing phase of irritants or some sort of that, then we must try to gather, or rather ponder on the idea of what we can extract from this experience of a kind of forced, if you say lockdown or forced phase of contemplation. We were forced to think about ourselves, about the scenario around us. And suppose if I consider a phase like Second World War, like the whole world in a way was affected by it, one of the greatest event of the 20th century. It cut across disciplines and thought structures in a very significant way. It is not only about media separately, finance separately, it is the whole academic world, it is the whole sociological thinking, everything got affected. So my point here would be whether we are open to take those challenges or rather calls that may be generated from this situation. What was happening in India and in the world to a great extent, we have seen the media as it was being practiced, especially I'm coming from the field of cinema. It had created certain hierarchy of forms, certain hierarchy of presentations, certain hierarchy of productions, etc. And there are, you can say, some of the major forms and there are some of the minor forms. Minor forms actually don't mean that they are less capable. Their capability is not actually presented to that extent to a varied mass of audience. So I would like to see this crisis as an opportunity where the minor forms, minor modes of engagement actually can take a little stride ahead. Suppose some of the concerns that the industry production, different mode of industrial thinking that is really pressing before us is whether a production with 50, 100 people in a whatever space, studio or real location, shooting, etc., would be possible in this scenario. Whether there will be codes of restriction of people to be involved, etc., etc. Now, one way of thinking is that, okay, there is a sense of normal which already is there, which was there earlier to this phase, to this pandemic, and we will modify ourselves to reach as close as to the normal as we had before. The other position, which might be more exciting, at least for me, and I'm sure for the new students and who would like to come into this field, is that, suppose there is a creative challenge put before the filmmakers that actually you consider yourself as a single person and also in a limited confined zone of confinement. There you have to arrive at your images, you have to put across your images, and you have to really put forward your film or audiovisual work. I mean, which is absolutely a contrary position to the idea that film is at a medium where multiple people and multiple mind have to work together. So whether we can take these opportunities into our own benefits. That is my way to think forward. Yes.
Wonderfully spoken, Mr. Ganguly. I mean, this brings to my mind, the funny stories about when there was censorship, this kind of cultural censorship around physical intimacy. Then in popular films, whenever the heroine were supposed to be in an intimate position, then suddenly birds and bees were shown. And it was, in terms of metaphors like that, the new language and new images were created. So maybe this crisis, because there is all kinds of constraints regarding space and social distancing, probably new images will be created. Would you agree? And I would request Mr. Ganguly, can you please speak a little louder for the benefit of our audience?
Okay, please. Am I loud enough now?
Yes, please.
A
Yeah.
little louder.
Okay.
That's better.
Okay. Yes.
I have a
please.
question here. I really
Okay.
don't know who it's for. It says, do you think the already growing OTT industry gets a big boost from this situation? And does it more or less level the playing field for independent filmmakers with minimum budget who didn't get much opportunities earlier? This is obviously for Mr. Ganguly. They've
Yes,
commented.
Yes.
absolutely.
Yes. There
So
are talks around that due to this crisis, these marginal fields, OTT platforms like OTT, etc., would really be in their due place, I should say. And we know that some of our ex-students who have passed in some earlier batches, they are taking this opportunity up and they are trying to put forward a product, put forward an audiovisual work where the emphasis, the control of the producer or the quote unquote money, that to some extent could have been avoided. We know, I mean, it was there for some time, that the idea called crowdfunding, that people pitch an idea and it is floated to the people, and people are putting money from different sources, different spaces, different countries, without any actually a pressure of return that generally a traditional producer would ask for. So these things obviously would come across, and we can actually foresee that if there is a group of interest, some people with similar group of interest with reasonable amount of disposable money, and it is quite possible that we earlier heard about investments and return. Now there will be investments for cultural return, which is a little bit of immaterial in nature, but when you put this kind of, even it might be a smaller amount, but when it will have a decisive sort of audiovisual artwork, so to say, you will have a kind of satisfaction that you have got a cultural return where you have actually put your effort, your whatever money, your mind, your intention to so that the product is made. So this kind
right.
of, yeah.
So what I gather is it's very similar to what Mr. Nilanjan they had said, looking at, if you're looking at independent film as like a startup or innovation, and these angel investors or people of high net worth who would be interested to invest in the cultural capital and not look for immediate return, that would give a boost to new creative people who have limited resources. Which brings me, yes.
Another question. This is actually adds on to what Saikat Roy asked about the platform that he was talking about, independent filmmakers. Professor Shovan wants to know what your take is on the OTT platform.
I just said that this platform is in its nascent stage. We see interesting works are happening there, and as days will pass, we will see more of these virtual platforms getting created. Not only those are commanded by like corporates like Netflix or Amazon Prime or that kind of thing, but there will be other kinds of online platforms of sharing and dissemination where there will be it will be mostly about a focused group of interest, and the way something a creative work will move from one mind to the other. So OTT platform that way is really one idea that many of the young pass outs, young sort of filmmakers, that they would like to venture in.
So it's interesting because, you know, at one time it was thought that the experience of watching cinema in a giant screen, in a completely dark place, and collective viewing, whereas the magnanimous quality of cinema was the main focus. The script was written according to that, the framing was done according to that, sound design was done according to that. But now it is the entire production and even the creative thinking have the small smartphone screen in mind, even when they think about framing. So maybe both will exist in some way or the other. For brand films, definitely there can be no alternative to the big theater, but also OTT platforms will come in a big way. That's what I understand from what you say, Mr. Ganguly, which interestingly talks, when we are talking about independent filmmakers and small budget, of course, how can we not talk about Satyajit Ray, someone who has worked with shoestring budget compared to the films that got made then and now. Also, lots of constraints. In fact, interestingly, Subroto Mitra has been credited with the innovation of bounce back like technique because of this constraint. So this actually gave rise to a new technique. So maybe this crisis will probably give rise to new grammar, to new techniques, so as to say.
This brings me to another question posted by Professor Arunima Das, where she says that the new norm, what are the new jugars that we will use in the production of film, when you understand that filmmaking is a people-intensive occupation or work? What are the kind of new things that we will do so that we are able to accomplish our objective, and yet keep in mind, or what are the possibilities, what are the probabilities, what is the way ahead?
Right. Just linking what Abhirupa said and Madam Singh is saying, one aspect of big theater, I start from a little earlier point, that big theater prompts a kind of immersion, that all of your senses are focused to the sound and the visuals, and that creates a certain kind of immersion, which is, I think, is a kind of psychological need as well, that you need to be immersed in it. So one of the issues that has been raised by filmmakers or theorists, that whether the small screen experience actually can be an alternative to that big screen immersive experience. Here I would like to say that, you know, where to some extent I will come to the later part of the issue as well, that in India we are still little away from some of the latest innovations which are happening in the world, like for example VR, virtual reality.
Right.
Virtual reality is taken up very seriously in different countries in the world, including not only in Europe and America, also places like Latin America. And those are now getting incorporated into the formal course structure as well. And virtual reality, because in India we have very limited exposure to it, it is not only about graphics, and it is not only about one kind of positioning of image, layering, etc. It is not only limited to that. Virtual reality has an immense scope even for a form like documentary. And people are saying that, who are exploring this form, that through virtual reality, if a documentary is made, then it can really work as an empathy machine. That this term actually has been used, empathy machine. So I am saying that the new people, they need to be really aware of these techniques, which are not really very much what you call capital intensive technology. Those can be learned, and I really can see, like, they are. It is a there is a very good possibility that people are roaming around in a space, whatever the space might be, with enough physical distance around them, and everybody is having a virtual reality headset with them, and that kind of experience would not only provide a new experience which we didn't have so far, also it would be immersive in a very different way, because you can extend your space any way you want to like. Suppose one incident is happening at one part of a frame and you want to focus your attention to some other zone, with your intention, with your bending of your head, with your pointing of your eyeballs, the virtual reality frame will expand or shrink or open up. So
That sounds really exciting.
yeah.
We
Lots
have
of
another question. We have another question from our student Oindrila Bera, where she's asking about, of course, a very small screen when you think of our phones. She is saying, what about YouTube? And what is the influence that it would have on society, media, entertainment?
One of the things that fascinates me, especially in YouTube, is that whenever you open your YouTube icon, tap your YouTube icon, immediately some YouTube videos open up for you, and that is being done by some kind of artificial intelligence tool based on your preferences, your searches, your various sort of travel in the zone of internet, etc. So there, it is not only you are finding somewhere through your searches, some options are being created for you in a very categorical way, and those options are what Nilanjan was telling earlier about every investor is a unique individual. So YouTube is also in a way trying to say that your attitude to media, your attitude to audiovisual work is also of a very individual nature. So that way, some of the profile of videos those are being proposed to you on YouTube, those are absolutely unique in nature, and I really enjoy that, and it is really like an encounter. You are not looking for it, you are not searching for it, but suddenly something comes up in front of you and that completely mesmerizes you. So YouTube is definitely a fascinating platform, no doubt about it. And one theoretical query that I have, I really want to pursue, and you are also like engaged in the media education, that there are some YouTube video, you see that there are number of likes and views, etc. And if you really look at those videos, they might be shot in the most quote unquote unprofessional way. So what is this attraction to the candid nature of unprofessionalism? That is one of the very key aspect of YouTube. The more unprofessional it is, as if it can generate more appeal to it.
extremely interestingly pointed out, the imperfection of art. Probably people are looking art to be as close to the real as possible. So maybe we need to reinvent images to deliberately make that imperfection. So maybe people are choosing the imperfection of humans over the perfect imagery that can be generated by machines, by software, etc. Looking at your body of experience, Mr. Ganguly, you have worked in the capacity of a film editor, script writer, as well as sound engineer. So it's basically doing very specialized jobs together. So do you think this multitasking would be a big way forward? I mean, do you think a person who is looking at direction solely as specialization should also try and learn skills like cinematography or skills like even sound engineering, maybe so that cost minimization, cost optimization also happens. At the same time, keeping in mind the new normal codes, that is social distancing, number of people in a shoot being limited and all that. So do you think multitasking is the way forward?
Multitasking is obviously one of the very key aspects of it, and what we have experienced in our learning days in Film Institute and also in our teaching days, that what is important for the student is to have a comprehensive relationship to cinema, and that will bring forth even the latent capacities to be a cinematographer, to be a sound engineer, to be a scriptwriter. It is not important to learn all those crafts separately and individually. It is more important to have a comprehensive relationship to the audiovisual art, and with a focalization of might be one technique, one craft, and one association. But through exploring that relationship, you would be able to really reach to the other modus operandi of, you know, associated sort of practices. And that is happening. That is actually, you cannot stop that. That is very much it is absolutely intensive among young students.
Right. Which brings to the other passion of yours, which is video art. It's an interesting and very unique interdisciplinary form of art. Like you said, you know, in an integrated approach, you look at video installation or video art. Interestingly, your art has been exhibited both in Europe and Asia, including the exhibition of Indian Highway. So if you just share stories about video art and elucidate our audience about what video art really is.
Right. So first we have to distinguish between video art and video installation. Okay. So these are at the margins of normal audiovisual work like film, video, etc., which need to be seen from beginning to end in a collective way, or might be in a singular way also, but where it is expected that you see from the beginning to the end. Suppose if you consider the publication of book, the traditional way of publication of book, you are supposed to open the first page, then go to the content page, read the introduction, go to the first chapter and subsequent chapters. But we now know, with the advent of internet and associated things, our reading no more happens in a very direct unidirectional way. We read something from here with a hyperlink, we go to another page. From there we come back to might be another page of the first one. So that way there is a constant shift of attention, and associated area are being gradually opened up. So this relationship is generally called haptic relationship rather than the optic relationship. In optic relationship, there is a foreground, midground, background. So if you want to reach to the background, you have to go through foreground and midground. But in haptic relationship, there is no foreground, midground, background. You can go from any point to any point based on your wish and intention. So what happens in video art is that, suppose you are making a video, it might be with sound or without sound, but it is expected that the video may not be seen only from the beginning to the end. It is run mostly in a museum space, or might be in some special sites, in a loop with different gadgets aligned, etc., whatever formulation you can do. And the people, as they see a painting, as they see a sculpture, they will come, they will see, they will appreciate it from different distances. They might sit for a while, they might even chat while looking at it, and after that they will go back and they might again come back. So that way the video art is now part of your ambience, the part of your experience, which need not be seen from beginning to end in a unidirectional way.
Right.
What happens to video? I just complete the video installation part also. Video installation is an addition to video art. What happens when the video is installed with a sense of strong spatiality around it? You create a video, and it is to be seen as a video art, but not in an inert dark room, where it is very important at which space, which site the video art is being played upon. So then the video is being installed in a space. That's why it is video installation. Yes.
So like it is site, video installation is site specific.
Yeah.
Whereas video art is more, non-linear. And each time you experience a video art, the immersive experience could be different for the same person for multiple viewing.
The nature of immersion will be very different there, obviously, because it may not be a narrative immersion. It may not be a narrative immersion. It might be a perceptual immersion. It might be a cognitive immersion. It may not be always a narrative immersion.
Absolutely, absolutely. So where we have come right now is, Rita, is there any further question?
At the moment, there isn't.
So we talk about this interesting time. We are at the threshold of probably this is the watershed of history that we are standing in. And as we look at unlocking the possibilities ahead, if we look back at the future, and here's a bridge question between Mr. Nilanjan De and Mr. Dev Kamal Ganguly, for both of you, in your respective fields, what is the power of amnesia? And here I'm talking about the positive power of amnesia. Right? If we talk about the epoch in history for Spanish flu, right after World War I, where there was a pandemic of huge nature, lots of people lost lives. But we don't see that as a reflection very much. I mean, we do have documentation, yes, but it didn't linger on people's collective memory so much. So from that, I think we can decipher that the inane positivity of human beings prompts us to sort of blurt out negativity and only look at what is ahead positively. So for both of you, Mr. Ganguly and Mr. De, I would like to request Mr. De to take it forward first about the power of amnesia and the positivity it has on the new normal.
Right. No, excellent question. Excellent point you raised. And the market, especially the equity market, there are examples galore where the positive power of amnesia has been very well demonstrated, and it has happened after every bubble, after every crisis opportunity cycle, the fullness of crisis opportunity cycles. And I can straight away tell you about the 2001 dot-com crisis, if you remember, where small time dot-com internet stocks which were just rising, and that created a bubble. But after the bubble ended and after the debris sort of settled down, there have been very smart IT companies that have really worked, and the proverbial phoenix has been rising from the ashes there. And it has happened earlier too. It has happened in the 1993 security scam crisis, and the primary issues, opportunities that have been given, that has given birth to many serious kind of opportunities for subsequent players. So the market has really moved on from where it fell, and this has created a lot of value for people who've used the crisis as a base and formed the bottom of the pyramid and actually moved up from there on.
Thank you very much. And the same question to Mr. Ganguly, how would you see that in the field of film and media?
I would just read a small quote by Susan Sontag, a very important cultural critic and commentarian. She wrote in 60s, and it is very much relevant to our time. She says, "Ours is an age which consciously pursues health and yet only believes in the reality of sickness. Ours is an age which consciously pursues health and yet only believes in the reality of sickness." It sounds a paradox, and I think we are still living within that paradox. I think the power of amnesia, what it does, it actually reverses this equation. Suddenly there are moments of euphoria, moments of, you can say, where life enforces its presence through us, where suddenly we see sickness as a passing phase, and we actually look toward as if uh, the virtues of life are all around us, you know. So amnesia, in a way, the memory and amnesia are actually connected. No new memory can be created if amnesia is not there. You know, the standard idea that there is a repository of memory. So if the memory's repository is full, so no new memory can be generated. So to create the new memory, you need the power of amnesia. And the interesting part also, what I feel, is that this amnesia is also, it's a selective amnesia. It is not that whatever you go through in last 10 years or last 15 years, that erases in a serialized way. That there is some innate capability in the collective mind among ourselves that picks and choose things to be forgotten, you know. And that might have interesting resonances in our time, and even for media, even for our living, actually, I should say. And that may be a very interesting tool for us to cope this situation.
Probably that's the new normal, fitting in the jigsaw puzzle based on what we choose to remember, what we choose to forget, what we choose to emphasize, and what we choose to take with caution. With that, we end the session, passing on the baton for the last time to Professor Preetha Singh. If there are any more questions.
We have an observation from a gentleman called Shin Chan. I can't recognize the name, but he could be a student. He has said that is 2020 going to be the golden period of management, where we will be more empathetic towards each other, where we will sort of husband our resources, where we will be more effective. What are your thoughts on this, both Deb Kamal and Nilanjan?
This is a time after doing considerable reflection. One would think that this is the time to harness one's resources and make optimal allocation of the same. And for every crisis, there's an opportunity. If you don't do that optimal allocation of resources properly and right on time, there will be no inclusive growth. And for the market, inclusive growth would be very important.
Ganguly, would you like to add to that?
Obviously, we need to take this experience as a learning experience, and not only for the time being, but maybe for the later phase of our life as well. So we have seen that when we were getting constrained in our spaces, a lot of other cycles of nature are cleansing itself in a very interesting way, rather unprecedented way in recent past, vis-a-vis recent past. So we need to now think about our expectation of experiences, what we consider significant experience, what we consider really significant moments that we will be cherishing. So that may not be always depending on transactional values, and there may be ideas of immaterial transactions which for some years now which have been really pushed aside. Now that may really come forward and will stay among us for a significant amount of time. Thank you.
I think, yes, that's very positive note to end to. So we don't know what lies ahead. We can only predict the newness of the new normal. Just like different booms happened, we can expect different sectors to come up, different sectors to mold itself in response to the crisis. I think that's what we are looking at. Would you agree, Preetha?
Absolutely. And I'm so glad. I would like to thank you, Avirupa. Thank you, Deb Kamal, and to Nilanjan for a very, very special session, especially since we have, I don't know how Avirupa did it, but we have both business in the way of finance, and we have media, and which really addresses the need of ISB&M because we are the International School of Business and Media. Thank you so much, Deep Kamal. Thank you, Nilanjan, for a wonderful, wonderful session.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Thank you so much.
Thank you.